My friends, hello. So, I got a pretty decent response to my video about the way that I read the Council of 13 with Marseille style cards. And I love doing demos, so I was happy that people enjoyed that. And someone said, do you do this with Rider-Waite Smith style cards too? And I said, well, I don't really read Rider-Waite Smith cards all that often anymore. But yeah, absolutely. So I thought I would do a video demonstrating how these exact same techniques can work with the Rider-Waite Smith cards too, and I used the Rider-Waite Smith deck directly. And the other thing I did was I thought it would be fun. If you watch that video, I used two sample questions, and in this case, I decided to reverse the point of view of those questions. So I'll talk more about that. So let's look. So the first question that I asked in the Marseille style video was about parents who were concerned about their college-aged son's behavior since he returned home. They felt like he was acting weird. So I answered that question with the cards, but in this case I turned it around and made it about the son asking the question. So his question was, ever since I've been home from college, my parents have been acting strange. What's the deal? And just for some context, he graduated and he's been away at school for 4 years, and he's out looking for work and a place to live. All right, so I drew this spread. I didn't use any significators, although I could have. But in this case, I just went without them to demonstrate how, you can do it with and without. In this case, I sort of let the reading tell me who's feeling what. All right, so the steps are the same, really. So we draw this Council of 13 spread, and then we start by looking at the first card for a hint. And the first card we've got is an interesting card. It's the High Priestess. And the High Priestess is in more esoteric traditions. She's like the keeper of the secrets, the holder of the myths and the stories, and she's the secret keeper, the keeper of the book. That doesn't really help us though in this kind of daily practical question. So when we're faced, and the reason I'm actually talking about this here is because it's a little bit more of a common occurrence with Rider-Waite Smith cards, because we know there are so many esoteric associations. We know that there's a lot of mythology in the cards that Waite and Smith put in. This isn't the female pope. This is the High Priestess. And she's got all this the columns of Boaz and Jachin, and just all this magic, the pomegranate seeds and the moon at her feet. She's got a lot. But again, all of that doesn't really help us when we're doing a practical daily reading, right? So what we've also got to do with the cards is look at them from a more practical daily point of view, right? So who is the High Priestess if she's not the keeper of the book? Well, she's the keeper of secrets, in essence. She's a representative of anyone who's kind of withholding, secret, silent, maybe a little judgmental. She's a gatekeeper, in a lot of ways. So in a daily reading, she could be someone who is the hiring manager or even the bouncer at the club, right? So I look at this card for a hint, and I get one. Are mom and dad acting weird? Yeah, definitely, and they're not telling why. So from here on out, we just read in groups of three. So we look at the first three cards in the horizontal row, and we have the Magician, the High Priestess, and the Seven of Cups. And again, the Magician in this case is not necessarily someone who's converting energy from the universe into alchemy, into magic. He's not directing his will towards any task. So what does the Magician do in a daily reading? Well, the Magician is attempting to exercise power, whether or not he has it. So he may not be capable of doing it, because we're not always in daily life, because this isn't a magical reading. It's just a pretty daily reading. So this combination of the Magician, the High Priestess, and the Seven of Cups says, as parents, they're probably trying to exercise power that they may or may not be able to exercise anymore, right? Because this kid's grown up. But they're not talking about it. So it's leaving him to speculate on any number of possibilities. So it's really confusing him. So this combo of the Magician, the High Priestess, and the a Seven of Cups already confirms what we knew, what was really the question. They're acting weird. Yep, they sure are. They're not telling him why, and they're leaving him really to guess, and he's feeling kind of overwhelmed by that guess. But one of the reasons why we already know is because they're trying to exercise power over a grown son who doesn't really respond to their authority in the way they used to. So that's the first combo. So that sort of is, I always like to find validation in readings, and so early on I find that can be helpful. So now we look at the vertical column, the first vertical column, and we've got the Five of Pentacles, the High Priestess, and the Six of Swords. So I read this as they're feeling out in the cold with zero clue about where their kid is going in life, right? Like, he's not communicating with them either. So the High Priestess represents them being withholding, but it also represents him being withholding. So nobody's telling anybody anything, and that's as we get on in the reading, you'll see going to be a source of problems. But they're feeling out in the cold. They don't know where he's going when he leaves, and they feel probably entitled to some explanation or inclusion in his life path. So now we read the next row of three. They used to be a whole family, the whole package, the total collection, and life was good, but now they're confused because he's happy to be taking the money they've given him, but they're not getting anything in return. All right, so again, the Ten of Pentacles there is sort of complete as family. The High Priestess is confusion, and the Six of Pentacles being very much what the Six of Pentacles can be, which is like zero return on investment there. So then we look at the horizontal column now, the outer column, and we've got Strength, the High Priestess, and the King of Swords. So in the absence of information, which is the High Priestess, they're going to exert whatever power they have, whether it's by strong-arming him or being, the parents of, if you live under my roof, and they may make this both emotional and psychological, right? Emotional from the Strength card, and all the major arcana stuff that comes with it, and also psychological with the King of Swords, but they're probably not being particularly nice about it, and that's probably because they feel like they're on the defensive. They're the victims of this whole thing. Then we look at the first diagonal here. We have the Five of Swords, again, the High Priestess, and the Three of Wands. So as tensions in the house rise and conflicts and arguments erupt, there's our five. Nobody's talking about why, our High Priestess, and everyone is feeling isolated and victimized. Now, my interpretation of the Three of Wands here is a little bit different. I'm really basing it just on the emotional energy of the picture. The sense of sort of being alone and looking off into the distance at what we don't have. So it gave me a sense of this family as each of them feeling kind of as the individual victim in this unpleasantness. But I did note here that if you look at the numerology, the 3 as growth and 5 as fire could mean that these fights are begetting more fights. Each argument lays the groundwork for more arguments because there's growing fires, you know what I mean? So there's stuff going on here that, like, each fight yields more ammunition for the next one. So we look at the next diagonal, and we've got the Four of Cups, again, the High Priestess and the Queen of Pentacles. And so here's really where we get some advice. There's opportunity that everyone's missing. So there's an opportunity there no one's seeing in the Four of Cups to stabilize emotions. Another iteration of the Four of Cups, right? So you can see how you can use two systems at once. So we get the image of the opportunity being missed, but we also get the combination of 4 as stability and cups as emotions. So you can add a lot of layer by learning different systems and playing with them. So the Four of Cups doesn't just have to be apathy or missing an opportunity, etc. It can also add the layer of numerology so that they're missing an opportunity to stabilize emotions. So we can pull on those things when we need them. by overpowering silence with a practical attempt to nurture each other. So basically, they could make lives better for each other, first of all, by recognizing this is an emotional situation. And if they acted more like the Queen of Pentacles, be nurturing and practical with each other rather than being withholding and silent like the High Priestess. So where the High Priestess is sort of fomenting resentment here, they could be a little bit more like the Queen of Pentacles and just like take care of one another. Now, you'll notice if you watched the other video I did with the Marseille cards that I looked at a lot of themes. I find that only occasionally jumps out to me and is useful when I'm using Rider-Waite-Smith style cards, partly because each of the cards feels like such an isolated situation. It's harder for me to sort of see patterns and whatnot. The themes that I'll mostly note are elemental, but again, that wasn't really in play here. So I went through all the 3-card readings here in the spread, and now my job is to tie it back to answer the question. So the question was, ever since I've been home from college, my parents have been acting strange. What's the deal? So my job is to tell them what the deal is, and the deal is they feel shut out of your journey, and they're trying to exercise whatever power they can, but you're too old for their old ways to work. They feel like you're fine taking their money while you look for work, but that you're not really giving them the courtesy of telling them what you're doing and how. So everyone's being quiet about what's really bothering them. And I think in this kid's case, he's doing it just because he's young and young people are thoughtless, but they're thinking a lot about it. So he could be the grown-up in the situation and end the conflict by being more open about what he's doing and why. So again, these are all the techniques that I used with the Marseille cards in the previous video, but did the exact same thing, just with a different system, and you get similar results. And you can be equally as practical if you look at the impractical cards, and I don't mean that in a negative way, but like the more esoteric, the more magical, the more ephemeral cards, as having a foot on the earth as well as a head in the sky, Let's look at the next example. So in the previous demo that I did, the question was about someone having a crush on their boss, and they wanted to know if their boss felt the same way. So now we have the boss who suspects that there's feelings there. So the boss says, ever since we finished this recent project, I've had a sense one of my employees has feelings for me. Am I right? And what do I do? And the context is that they've worked together for years, but never as closely as they did on this project. So, man, I'm seeing typos all over the place. I did this really fast, but, I have to squeeze videos in where I have time to do it. So we follow the same steps, but the context changes. So does the way the cards interact with each other, right? And I talk about this all the time. Context is key. The cards only mean what they mean in the context of the question and each other. So we'll see how that changes here. All right, so as always, we're going to look at the first card for a hint, the High Priestess again. Now, I think that, again, she's withholding information here, but it's a different situation, right? So she's keeping something to herself. But I get more visual cues from this card than I did in the previous one. She's being withholding, but she's revealing just enough to sort of drop hints and make it, clear a little bit that there's something going on there. There's opportunity, so to speak. The way that the High Priestess has the scroll just slightly revealed, just to say, hey, maybe there's something, you know what I mean? So there's just there's something being slightly revealed there. And then we look at the first 3, and again, the context changes, so the way the cards interplay. There are a few ways that I sort of instantly read this. She could be willing the unknown into being, so she may be trying really hard to sort of make these feelings exist, to make her fantasies real. And so the magician becomes will again, and willpower, willing the unknown. The unknown is the High Priestess into being to make her fantasies, the 7 of Cups, real. The other thing that I noticed too is that technically the magician and the High Priest are partners in tarot. They are, a pair. especially in the Rider-Waite Smith. So she may view them, in fact, as perfectly paired, and that stokes her fantasies about the situation. So it does seem likely there's something happening there emotionally. And here we get our first hint of the risks that are involved in this, and I'll explore why there are risks. But the Five of Pentacles, it's always a card that's difficult to not associate with loss. And then the Six of Swords suggests a journey. So that it might suggest that if what's unknown becomes known, one or both of them may end up losing. One of them may have to quit, or both may, one may get fired, etc. So there's a real risk of losing and having to move on. And there's definitely a mournful quality to this. So, this is a real situation that has to be handled well, because there is a real risk at play. And that's one of the things that comes out right away. And here we get into one of the arguments of why it's potentially important to do third-party readings like this. As you'll see when I do the final answer, this may be a potentially powerfully saving experience for both of them. So this is where tarot can be a guide, So there's a real risk, and the real risk can be avoided, and we'll see how. Reading the outer row, this was where I started to get a little head scratchy, right? I thought, this is where I started to feel like, it's so hard, I hate doing this. But actually, it's not, because the first thing I saw was the most important thing. And sometimes that's the key. Like, not every row has the same equal value from card to card. And with that Six of Pentacles, all I could see was a reminder that this guy is in a position of power. This boss is in a position of power. He literally signs the paychecks, right? So he has to be aware of that. Whatever he does is going to be read in the context of being powerful. Even if he's a middle manager, you know what I mean? He still exercises authority, and that's important. And it's important to know, because if we think about the abuses of power that go on, and the perceived abuses of power, with great power comes great responsibility, right? So we look at the world around us and we see all these really gross men in the world who have abused positions of power. And we're hyper aware of that and hypersensitive to that. So he needs to make sure that he's not doing that. So then I read the Ten of Pentacles as maturity, rather than family. So, he's in a position of power. Regardless of what he thinks he knows, the High Priestess, he has to be grown up about this. And we saw the danger about why. So he's got to be really, really smart about how he handles this. This takes that further. So with strength, the High Priestess and the King of Swords, he really needs to be strong, probably keep his distance. He can't do anything that might stroke emotions. He needs to be thoughtful, clear-eyed, and really aware of what he does and what he says in particular, because the King of Swords, remember, swords can equal language, can equal thought and words. And so he really needs to be careful about what he does and says. Now, the other thing he has to do is sort of the counter of that is not do anything that seems like he's avoiding or distancing himself in a way that affects this person negatively, right? So again, he has to be the king. He has to be really smart and aware and hypervigilant about what he's doing and saying and what those things tell others. Looking at the diagonals, there's an opportunity here for him to feel like a victim, and that's not good. He's not a victim. Nothing has happened yet. He just needs to be thoughtful about where he's going, but he can't go down this downward spiral of feeling like he's being attacked, and sort of throwing it all away and having to sort of move on. He may start to view himself as a victim because of the position of power that he, applied for and got. He may start to feel like, well, I'm going to have to move on for everyone's sake. That's not necessarily true. So he needs to be careful to avoid victimhood here. So what does he do? Well, here's where the final diagonal comes into play. What's important here is that there are real emotions at work. So he needs to make sure he can stabilize those emotions and accept help about his confusion, right? So stabilizing emotions, Four of Cups. Accept help is also the Four of Cups because of that little hand in the clouds there. About his confusion, the confusion is the High Priestess. From someone who knows the practicalities of this. So the Queen of Pentacles, in this case, becomes human resources. So he needs to recognize that emotions are at play, not be victimized, not be dramatic, be stable, accept help, and go to someone who knows how to handle these things. And again, that's really the beauty of doing a reading like this, is it's a reminder of like, hey, you're not in this alone. There's help. You just need to be smart about what you do, and go to someone who knows how to do this, how to handle these things. So again, we tie it all back to the question. So he said, ever since we finished this project, I've had a sense when my employees has feelings for me. Am I right? What do I do? It's likely, although you can't be sure, and I think the High Priestess reminds us of that too. While it feels like it's likely, we can't ever know unless someone tells us, and so we have to be mindful of that too. There are some signs, and there's some risks, so remember that because you exist in a position of power, you need to be mature about this, be alert, attempt to react from... be alert. This should say attempt not to react from a place of impulse or resentment. Share your concerns with your HR pro, who can guide you through how to handle this as a leader, right? So that's it. So again, the value of a third-party reading is that sometimes the danger can be avoided. So if he gets guidance from human resources on what to do and how to handle it, he can protect everybody, which is what a good leader does. So that's that. So again, the magic of these techniques is not limited only to pip-style decks or playing cards or Lenormand or whatever. You can do this with the Rider-Waite-Smith deck just as well as anything else. It's not about the techniques necessarily. You can use whatever techniques you want with any system. For me, it's less about the technique and it's more about the way that we approach the cards in the context. Both of these questions were about very real daily things. Maybe dramatic to the people going through them, but they're things that happen. None of this was about spiritual growth or psychology, and so as a reader, my job is to look at the cards through the lens of the daily, of the banalities. The High Priestess can't be representative of the Keeper of Secrets or the Keeper of the Book or mystery traditions in a reading about, like, what do I do about this thing at work? It's got to be about something specific. So what I do as a reader is I say, like, who is the High Priestess if she's walking down the street? Who's the magician if he's walking down the street? Who's the magician in my office? And so I start to think in terms of the context. Now, in a different context, the magician might be the IT guy who manages to fix my computer, or the boss, who she's able to get my screwed up paycheck taken care of. You know what I mean? Like, the magician may be different in different contexts, but the context is what tells me. But I need to be able to view the cards both from whatever sort of more magical view I have of them, but also from like a banal point of view. What's death when I'm going through my work day? It's probably hitting send on the proposal or whatever, you know what I mean? So that's how I try to look through this stuff. So there we go. A demo of these Marseille style cartomantic techniques on Rider-Waite-Smith style cards, and also taking those trumps, those major arcana, and making them tell us something about everyday life. So as always, hope you're well, and we'll talk soon.